different things too. So if you wanted to speak concerning any of the public hearings that we're having or a specific issue, you might want to wait until then, or you can speak now. So I guess I would ask Marilyn, would you want to speak now or to one of the issues?
Two issues.
Okay.
Not now.
All right,
Thank you.
yes. And then Kelly, did you want to speak now or to a specific issue? Very good.
And the reason I'm here tonight, first of all, good evening to everybody, and Mayor Krantz and Commissioner Olson, Commissioner Moore. My name is Kelly Fredson Olson. I live at 204 West Birch Street in downtown Shelton.
1 second. Is the button pushed? Sometimes we got to push the
Okay.
button.
And I wanted to take this opportunity to extend supreme thanks to the Public Works Department in Shelton. Last week, we had a plumbing crisis at our house. We had a leaky water issue that we couldn't identify, and I'd been notified earlier that my water consumption was high, and I had a plumber come out, and I thought I'd resolve the issue, and lo and behold, the water meter was still spinning out of control, and so the plumber came out again, searched inside, under the house, 4 crawl spaces, no luck. So I was referred to Mike Olson, who is a contractor by trade, and Mike was kind enough to come over, and he said, I'll try to help you identify the problem. And I have, the property where I live has a home on it that was built in '29, so there were no records to locate the water lines. Plus, we do have additional soil on top of the property related to flooding crisis that we've experienced over the last 20-plus years. So Mike was kind enough to call Craig Gregory at the Public Works Department and said, by any chance, do you have a metal detector or something we could use to try to identify where the water lines are? And lo and behold, he sent 2 people, Matt Deemer and Mike Albaugh, over to the rescue with a metal detector. And with their assistance, we located the leaky spot, which was underground, and they shared all kinds of instrumental information and expertise in helping us resolve the problem, as did Mike. And about 3 hours later, my water spinner was not spinning anymore. I was so ecstatic, I couldn't tell you how relieved I was. I was really trying not to freak out. But the public water people have come to our rescue countless times in the past with flooding crises over the years, and our family is eternally thankful. Many, many thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly.
Just to follow up on that, I didn't use any undue influence to get them there. They just immediately,
No, they came
immediately
with all their
and it was,
They were wonderful.
was on private property, but they just, the situation with a single woman, that they just went above and beyond. And as many people have told me before, and I've experienced it myself as a builder, that those guys will do whatever they can do to help you out. Kelly offered to bribe them, pay them dinners, and they refused that. They didn't. I said, bake them some cookies and take them down there and put their name on it. But no, Matt and Mike were really, really great. So I passed that along to them. And Greg too. All of them, they just stepped right up. And it was wonderful in a small town that, we still have that. Even though we're hammering all of our citizens with rate increases, that the guys really worked hard and go that extra mile. I'm sure they took them off of something else they were doing, and they came right down and really helped her out. Right? So,
But what did Greg do?
but I had to dig the hole.
Oh, you dug the hole.
That's true.
I couldn't get him to do
Yeah.
that part.
Well, what did Greg do? Did he watch?
He oversees
He
it.
oversees it, okay. That's fine. He was there, that's for sure, okay. Anyway, okay, thank you very much for your comments. All right. Next is that we are going to recess now out of our regular meeting and into a public hearing. So we're now recessing out of our regular meeting, and this public hearing is going to a briefing on an ordinance relating to water rates being presented by our city engineer, Mike Michaels.
Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners. I'm going to keep my piece of this brief since we went fairly well into detail a few weeks ago on this, and just basically remind the Commission that back on May 12th we had a briefing on this, and Following on with previous discussions, we've brought forward a rate ordinance to deal with the fact that our scheduled rate increases have expired in the current ordinance and reset that. Listening to commission's discussions, their concerns, we've done a couple things in here. We've kept the rates low to begin with, or the increases low to begin with, and incrementally raised them up down the road. And to that end, we started out, it's a 5-year plan essentially, 4.5 years. The remainder of this year, starting in August, would be at 3%, 3% again in 2015 and 2016, with it increasing to 4% for 2017 and 18. That'll give us plenty of time to get into the next comp plan update and associated financial model to make better decisions on the next go-around. In addition, we corrected some issues with the fire lines and basically reinstituted and adjusted language so we can start collecting on the private fire lines, starting those off with the 2011 rates as was originally introduced with the comp plan that's currently in place. One final note, and you may or may not notice it in the draft ordinance that's in front of you, but based on the questions that our finance director had brought up about the language of repeal and replace, Greg and others worked with Kathleen late last week, did a couple little modifications in the beginning of section 1. We pulled out the repeal language and essentially made the effect that we wanted, which was that the fire lines would not be retroactively charged by adding a little bit of language to the footnote under the tables in Schedule 1. So that's all I have at this point.
All right. Next, what we'd like to do is have anybody, if they have anything, public comments from the public. Public testimony is being taken at this time. So, Marilyn, if you wanted to come forward and talk about this, you're welcome to do that.
I have just a very brief comment. Marilyn Vogler, 420 East Poplar. I support the rate increases. I'm glad to see the improvements being made. As I recall, during the first presentation of this proposal for the loans and discussion of levels, there was a comment made that we wouldn't need to expect rate increases above, I don't know whether it was 5% or 4%, well into the future because of the rate of the interest on the loan. I would like to see something in the ordinance that if it can't pledge absolutely that beyond 2018 rates don't increase above 4%, 5%, at least some kind of pledge that the city will do its best to keep them at that level.
Thank you for your comments. All right. Any other comments? Commissioner Moore, I guess, on this.
We have talked about this quite a bit. I guess the one thing that I wondered about as far as the fire lines charging the fire lines beginning at the 2011 level, does that cover the costs, or do we know what the costs are? Will we have to play catch up with those in the future?
It's hard to tell for sure because of the way the model is developed. It would take some digging in the model to figure that out, but putting in the numbers as we have developed them here based on the commission's discussion, I don't, within the level of error that's in that model, I don't see any issues right now with the funding levels in the utilities. So.
And I guess something is better than nothing at this point. Okay, I believe that's all my questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Olson?
On the fire lines, are those charged only? The lines that are not the dry stand pipes? Do these would be for charge lines only? Because don't some of the businesses have the dry ones? Where you
Yes, yeah, that would be true because the dry ones would not have the backflow prevention devices on them. So, correct. Yeah, this would be the wet systems as all of them in town are, as I understand. If there are any dry lines, it's very few of them.
I know Olson's has a dry line.
Yeah.
Is that something that's no longer acceptable in building codes? Dry lines?
That would be a question for either Fire Marshal Mike Patty or our building official, Kelly Mayo. I don't know the answer to that one.
And then my only other comment is I would agree with Marilyn that we'll do our best to hold us to that, you know, but of course, like it says in the thing, once we hit 2018 and all these things are done, there'll be another rate study done. And I don't know if I'll be here or not, but we'll certainly keep them down if possible.
I'll be here to remind you.
I know we'll be here to take the heat.
Thank you.
Well, my comment is if you're going to raise rates, what I've heard from especially the business community and also the residents is to keep them incrementally, small and incremental. There's really not much of a reason. If it's just going to continue to go up, it's much better to keep them as small as possible, as incremental as possible, and so I think I favor that. In fact, along with the other commission, I believe did push on. We had said, well, we don't have to do it for a couple of years. Well, that's only going to make 5 and 6 or 7%. Let's get in on it really quick and keep them as small as incremental as possible. So I would favor this and think that it's the prudent thing to do. So we have all made our comments, and I believe that we concur that this is something we will. Yes.
I'd just like to make one comment really for the public out there as to what this rate increase means for the average residential customer. At the 3% rate increase, at least the first year, is probably going to be on the average about 75 cents more on their monthly bill. So if they're wondering what a 3% rate increase means, that's for the average customer, residential, that's what it'll be.
Very good. Thank you for that input. At this time, I believe we concur to move forward with this, and that it is a staff's recommendation to have a first reading of this ordinance, number 1852-0614, and place the second reading on the consent agenda for June 9th, 2014. That's what I have in my notes. Okay, so at this time, we're going to close this public hearing and return to our regular meeting. And Leslie Ann, could we please have a reading of the ordinance?
Ordinance number 1852-0614, first reading. An ordinance of the City of Shelton, Washington, amending Chapter 15.28 of the Shelton Municipal Code relating to water rates.
Okay, now we're going to recess back out of our regular commission meeting and open a public hearing. So we're recessing out of the regular and opening a public hearing on three ordinances numbered 1848-0614, 1850-0614, and 1851-0614. And we're going to be briefed on this, I believe, all of these by Mr. Steve Goins.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. I've briefed the Commission on these three items, and we, mainly out of efficiency, wanted to try to capture all of these under one public hearing and move them forward. They are moving at different sequences, and I'll describe that a little bit in more detail as I close, but there's three ordinances under consideration here. The first one is for amendment to Chapter 2.36 of the Shelton Municipal Code and 20.32, which relate to the process for applying, processing, and approving an appeal of a plan unit development application. In reviewing that particular section of code, we identified a number of elements that we thought could be improved upon in terms of a process for the applicant, as well as clarity for staff and the city in terms of how the process works, particularly how an appeal would work. So we proposed a number of revisions, and as we looked into this, we sort of kept finding things that we wanted to adjust and amend. And I think in terms of the biggest single item, it's probably the deletion of a second phase of the PUD application process. As the ordinance is currently adopted, there's really two steps, two key elements in approving an application. There's a preliminary review of a draft of a concept, if you will. That goes through a process, and then there's a final preliminary, final plan unit development process where final action is taken on a more refined application. In terms of what the applicant's trying to achieve, we saw that as being rather redundant and added a lot of time to a process that we didn't see gets a lot of value. An application like this is intended to sort of develop a framework for future development to apply to. And that can be rather complicated, it can be rather simple depending on the size of the project, but it's not intended to be all that specific in terms of something you could build from. It's something you design to and try to make goals and objectives to achieve. So we thought that this initial step was sufficient to do that, and we eliminated that second step in the process, which saves the applicant money and it saves staff time in terms of a process. Those ordinances all have that stricken and underscored text so you can see where the changes occur. That's sort of an overview of the PUD application. The next ordinance, rather, is regarding wireless communication facilities. We had the state come and provide us an audit of our land use regulations, and among the things that needed an update was this particular section of code. And really, it's to ensure that we're meeting current provisions that relate to SEPA changes, State Environmental Policy Act, federal regulation changes, and case law that's came along the way. We don't have a lot of applications for wireless communication facilities in town, but if we did, we certainly want to be in lockstep with these other regulations, so we propose these regulation changes. And as an example, this describes that there will not be any unreasonable discrimination among providers. That's some specific language that was picked up in a case called T-Mobile versus Fairfax County, where there seemed to be some concern that the jurisdictions was targeting a certain provider over another in terms of a process. Most of these changes relate to this kind of case law or these kind of SEPA changes. The definitions are modified and they really mean the same thing, but the wording is changed slightly. Instead of co-location with a hyphen, it's one word. Again, just to be consistent with current SEPA law, and it's those kind of nuances that we're trying to capture. The last amendment.
Can I make one quick comment here?
Sure.
In this, I noticed the items that are crossed out, the underlying items, are those all added?
That's correct.
All new.
That's new
added
language.
stuff? All new, okay.
Yeah, the stricken language is language that is in the current version and is being deleted. The last ordinance under consideration is amendments to section 20.49, which is our site plan review. In this case, we saw, again, upon reviewing this, there was a lot of things that we wanted to try to address and change. In our audit, it was identified as it's unclear, or certainly the appeal process could use some amending here. There was a process identified in reviewing the code as it's written about revoking a site plan approval. We saw this as being rather cumbersome and really unnecessary. A development is required to adhere to the provisions as the permit is issued, and we are creating a lot of process that really is unnecessary by having a revocation hearing for a site plan that may not be consistent with what was approved. We simply move forward with a plan and require the applicant or the developer to adhere to the plans as they were adopted. We also identified a number of elements that I think spoke to the purpose of this, and I think that was, it may seem simple, but when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. Our objective here was to have a series of processes that allow someone to come to the city, better understand what the requirements might be for a particular development or an application, and have a process that they can sort of test out what they're thinking and how they're reading our codes and provisions to see if that design works within those and what revisions or amendments that we would need to make or they would need to address in terms of a process. The site plan review is intended to provide a streamlined way for them to get those questions answered very effectively and without investing a lot of capital in a design. They can quickly move forward with these answers into a process that would get them a final building permit. There was some concern that we were sort of circumventing a way to ensure that development's done in a way that protects the public, that has all these design features in mind. And the site plan process isn't intended to, at the end of that, you don't get a building permit and start building. What you get is a review that says this design meets our design criteria. You still have to come in and get a building permit. You have to ensure that your final plan meets all the setbacks, parking, landscaping, but it gives you a roadmap, if you will, towards success, and that's really the objective. So in that, there's quite a bit of stricken language, particularly in the back of that ordinance where that revocation of the site plan process is in there. We just didn't see a lot of value in retaining that. At the end of the day, we think this is a real great improvement to a process that already works pretty well for us. By and large, the site plan review process is something we do pretty quickly, but this will enhance it further, and we're hoping to use it more as the economy improves. In terms of the process tonight, our request is to have a first reading of all of these ordinances. The amendments for the hearing examiner and the PUD revisions are a little further along than the other two. They have completed a 60-day review at the state level. We've received no comments from the state or any agencies regarding issues with that particular ordinance. We'd like to have that one set on the consent calendar for second reading next week, but we'll bring back the other two once that 60-day review period's completed. We may receive other comments that we want to address before we have the second reading. That concludes my comments.
Thank you very much, Steve. If there's anybody, this is an opportunity for public testimony concerning these, and so if you'd like to speak concerning these, come forward. And you've already signed in, Marilyn, and for the record,
I have.
you want to state your name again?
Sure, Marilyn Vogler, 420 East Poplar. I want to speak to two of these. I hope I can do it in 3 minutes. There's a lot about the planned unit development I like, particularly involving creative design, the allowance for small lot homes, the emphasis on mixed neighborhoods. But I think taken with the site review, site plan process revisions, they cause me some concern. Because I think overall the place of environmental review and opportunity for public input is unclear. The general effect seems to be to strengthen the role and position of the developer and decrease opportunity for public participation. With regard to the PUD, there are particular lack of specifics about environmental review, although the powers of the examiners say they shall examine information including environmental impact statements, and the definition and purpose says it's to provide opportunities for increased environmental protection. When you look at the application, I don't know where that information comes in, because the SEPA checklist is included in what has to be submitted with the caveat if it's required. The entire section D in the current legislation, which says environmental information shall be submitted in accordance with the State Environmental Policy Act, has been omitted, as has, and this I think should concern commissioners, section B, which provides that the city may request additional materials. That has been crossed out, so presumably we can't ask for any more than they give. Later in describing the application and public hearing process, following the director's review, there's to be a public hearing, but crossed out again is the caveat that this needs to take place after the SEPA process has been completed. And so it seems like there's not much environmental review. In terms of the site plan review procedure, it certainly does streamline it. And again, the purpose seems to be to allow developers more leeway and more certainty, which is not a bad thing. But I want you to look at the language. In the current version, the intent is positively stated: to promote public health, safety, the general welfare, to lessen traffic congestion and accidents, to restore natural beauty and other natural resources. In the proposed version, the positives in this intent have been changed to negatives. And in fact, the director may request modifications under limited conditions, and then only to the extent reasonably necessary to eliminate or minimize adverse effects on adjacent properties, subject properties, or public facilities. No mention of general public good. May I continue for just a bit? The decision to require modifications or conditions can be based on things like traffic and noise, but it's negative, it's not positive, and it's limited. Again, there seems to be no provision for public hearing. There is a meeting to be held of a site review committee. The attendees are very specifically limited and doesn't say a member of the public. The only place in the current ordinance that public hearing was mentioned was in the section on revocation, which has been eliminated. The application, again with environmental concerns, is supposed to include an environmental checklist, again, when required, but nowhere does it seem to be required. Now, this may be my ignorance. These may all be provided for someplace else, but I miss them here. And I think about this in terms of Shelton Hills. You'll remember, I hope, I spoke in favor of that, but we were told that we would have a chance to review environmental concerns later in the process. I thought that was the site plan review. I don't remember, but I don't want to lose track of public concerns, environmental concerns, when we consider how we encourage developers to come. Thank you.
Thank you. At this point, Steve, would you like to address some of those concerns?
Mayor and Commissioners, there was a number of comments and issues raised there that would probably take a lot of time and detail at this juncture to address. Perhaps instead of having a second reading on this item, we could extend the comment period, and I could bring this back and address those comments maybe next week or at a future meeting.
Okay, which item exactly is it then?
This is these comments, I believe, were all related to the PUD regulations that we were requesting a second reading on.
Okay.
There's not a drop-dead date to move this forward. We can move at a pace
Well, that's
that will
item
allow
number
us
one.
to address these items. That's correct.
Item number one.
Is that as well as the site review, but I can give you these if you want.
In terms of the site review provisions, we were requesting a first reading, but we weren't interested in moving that forward next week or even in a couple of weeks. We need to wait until the 60-day review period is complete at the state, which is probably not till the end of the month.
Okay. That's clear. So you're saying you get a first reading on all three now, but with an extension on the first one? Or not a first reading on the first one?
We would certainly recommend a first reading. It sounds like there may be some concern having a second reading on the PUD regulations, which was part of our request. Delaying the second reading until we can provide the commission with a response to these items, I think would be prudent, and we would support that.
Okay, and one other little detail, I believe this was all of these recommendations and strikes and additions were run before our legal counsel. Is that, these were all addressed or looked at by legal counsel?
I'll let Kathleen address that.
Yeah, we actually had quite a hand in preparing these, and part of the reason we did remove some of the language regarding SEPA is because a year or so ago, we did a fairly sizable new ordinance that adopted all of the SEPA rules under state law. And the city has no latitude to deviate from those rules. So whether environmental review is required and at what junction and what environmental review looks like is all a product of state law. So that was the main reason, is that it was awkward to mention SEPA and these other provisions when it's already covered elsewhere.
That was what my understanding was, for the best of my knowledge, Marilyn, on this. And so maybe we can hear from our other commissioners a little bit about this and see if they agree with staff's recommendation on this. Any other questions or comments from my fellow commissioners?
Yeah, I was, in your brief, you state that recent court decisions on the Growth Management Hearings Board, is that what's driving most of this then? Is that very language you're talking about, that we no longer have control over the SEPA review at all?
Well, that's been the case for, ever since SEPA was adopted, but what's different now is that we have cleaned up our environmental ordinances and adopted not only new SEPA rules, but also new critical areas regulations and other environmental protections. And those are standalone processes that are triggered when the right type of application is filed.
So those would all fall under the discretion of the director then, if there were issues with them?
Well, there really isn't any discretion.
So you have to follow the state mandate on that?
Right.
Okay. I agree that I'd like to sit and wait on this for another week or two just to digest it, because it just seems like it is awfully slanted towards the developer, which I get that. We're running out of good places to develop, and with the requirement for higher densities, it makes sense to be doing things like this. But it worries me when you watch the news, what's going on in Seattle with these apartments and things like that. I don't see anywhere where we're addressing issues like that with parking. Are these strictly going to be new developments outside the current residential neighborhoods primarily? Or do we have provisions to protect, say, historic areas, historic districts from something like that happening, which is happening in Seattle, where they're tearing down or building on skinny lots and going up 3 stories and putting in, 15 people and not accounting for parking or recreational areas. So I'd like to see a little more, I don't know if we can add anything like that, but it concerns me when it seems that it hasn't been addressed at all anywhere as far as the parking standards off-street. That's already in the PUD, that their allowed number of dwelling units may include small lot residential developments in various forms of multi-residential development, not permitted in underlying zoning. So then how do we protect ourselves from that?
Typically, the provisions for parking are citywide, and if a plan unit development is proposed that wants to deviate from those standards, there could be ways to evaluate that, and that would be part of the process the hearing examiner ultimately would consider. By and large, the objective is to have a project that creatively improves the condition, not deteriorates the condition, and that's part of the incentive of trying to provide some flexibility. If someone has a type of project where maybe there's enhanced bus service, for instance, and they want to take advantage of that but have less parking because they're gearing their project around maybe being near the transit center or something like that. Having the ability of considering that as part of the PUD application consideration and process. At the end of the day, you have to have a pretty strong belief that the project will be better than it would have been otherwise, and that's the goal.
And then, along with Marilyn's comments too about the complete removal of our ability to revoke a site plan approval, kind of bothers me a little bit too. That I'm just afraid of being taken advantage of. I guess that a developer coming in who we think has good intentions but knows how to circumvent things real well. that if it's strongly enough put in there to protect ourselves. And without the ability to, like the whole thing of the intent is taken out. I just want to see some language that I know we're protecting ourselves, I guess, a little better. I don't know if that makes sense to put it in there, or do you feel comfortable enough that that's already there inherently without it being stated?
I think the thought was, rather than inviting a process where we have to formally deny someone this change that they're contemplating, is simply to deny it outright up front and not have a process where that can be considered and reviewed and have a hearing. The building official, the planning department, or whatever department's affected would simply require that the development meet the design that was put on the plans and not approve it or not allow it to move forward if it's deviating from that, or have a process where they get approval to deviate. I don't know if Kathleen wants to add to that, but that seemed a lot more straightforward, and having a process to revoke a site plan just seemed like a lot of work and effort and process to not really achieve anything that you couldn't do simply by requiring the development to meet the objectives that were laid out in the first place.
Yeah, the revocation process, as it was drafted, called for revoking the site plan approval as a sanction for the developer not building what he or she was supposed to build. Whereas what we do if someone is building not according to code or not according to plan approvals, we issue a stop work order, which is contained in a different part of the code. So there's really, it's kind of meaningless, kind of pointless to revoke someone's approval if they're not building what they're supposed to build. What you need to do is force them to build what they're supposed to be building rather than revoking their approval. You're sort of working at cross purposes if you do that. So that was our thinking there.
And there's no mechanism for them to appeal that then?
Well, we're taking it out.
The
The
you're taking
revocation
out the
process,
mechanism. Okay,
right.
I got you.
So we would use a stop work order instead.
Okay, I had, it's kind of alarming when you look at this and there's so much stricken, and so I can certainly understand. We had comments from Pat Vandehe the other day who was very alarmed, and reading through it, I have a few questions too, and so I will just ask these and maybe not expect an answer right now. But what I was wondering on the planned unit development is, it says an acre is the minimum size, and I don't have a clear idea of how many places in the city that would be available at this time for development of that sort. And also, is it like a square acre, or is it a long acre, like a strip? Is it square footage, or is it an actual thing?
We would define that in terms of the square footage. The configuration would be perhaps a consideration if it was oddly shaped enough, but by and large, an acre of land in whatever configuration would be applicable, which is about roughly 2 blocks in Shelton. If you let's consider the typical blocks that we have here, they're about a half acre apiece. The objective there was to promote opportunities to allow someone to consider a planning development, which is again a process where we can have a more creative, thoughtful development that allows some flexibility, but for the purpose of making it better. There probably are a number of places where you could consolidate parcels and create a 1 acre development. We thought that was preferred over having a larger number where there might not be a lot of opportunities, or a quarter acre site where it's really hard to get real creative when you're talking about a very small parcel.
Mm-hmm.
So we landed on that as a good place to start.
Okay, and then this kind of relates to what Marilyn was asking, and a comment that Mike made about the parking, is I'm assuming that a different chapter or different chapters in the code cover things like sidewalks, streets, signage, that all of that is addressed in other chapters?
The standards certainly are. The process would allow someone to consider a deviation from those standards if they can demonstrate, for instance, with stormwater, that there's no reduction in the quality of meeting the requirements. You're treating the stormwater, you're not impacting your neighbors. All those items that you're trying to address are met. They may be met in maybe a more progressive fashion, using rain gardens and other mechanisms that are sort of more progressive than past practices. Those are all under consideration as part of this process. The applicant needs to demonstrate how that's at least equal, if not better, solution than what the standards would normally allow.
Okay, but it's not just a free-for-all. Those things have to be addressed.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. I wondered about the language about the expiration within 7 years. And what I wondered about it is it says that it is binding that runs with the property, and it runs for 7 years. And so, unless the project is abandoned. So I just had the question about what constitutes abandonment. Is that a formal process? Or if the owner or the applicant just decides to sell the property and take off, is there a way that the new owner could abandon it?
Well, we changed it to 7 years because that's what state law has for expiration of preliminary plat approvals. So we wanted it to track with what you have to do for subdivisions, which are sort of going to logically follow planned unit developments. But in terms of abandonment, it's kind of a case-by-case determination because there are a number of ways that a project can be abandoned. A developer could tell us that they're going to abandon the project. We could have no progress, no timely progress, no answer from the developer, can't find the developer. There are any number of scenarios where we would see fit to declare it abandoned.
Yeah, I would just, as I was reading it, and I realized that probably wouldn't happen, I was thinking that would be really bad to tie up that large piece of property, waiting, if it was tied up, legally bound to one project that wasn't going to happen. And my big concern with this always is that the language to make sure that a planned unit development does not adversely affect the adjoining properties, specifically neighborhoods. And I would like to see that language strengthened because we've seen how in areas where the adjacent zoning has changed, the neighborhoods have deteriorated. And so I feel like we really need to take the utmost care to protect our existing neighborhoods. And I think that's everything right now. I've read a number of other codes from other cities about the PUD ordinances, and so they vary widely. It was difficult to compare. So thank you. I know that was a lot of work.
All right, so what it appears is that what we're going to do is have a first reading, hopefully tonight, on these three issues. We're postponing the second reading indefinitely. We will read, when you're going to come back with some more information and probably have a great opportunity to talk to my fellow commissioners a little bit more about the other areas in the code that may actually be what they're talking about other than just this document. And so I feel that one thing I will say is if there is something that we are doing in striking some language that would help encourage some building and development in our city, whether it's a planned unit development or whatever, I, for one, would encourage it because we're coming out of a 6 or 7 year kind of a low point. I mean, we ain't had a whole lot going on. That's a southern term, kind of. And so I would say that we do want to kind of, make sure someone's going to not do something real radical, but I think we have a lot of regulation, I think, that probably curtails that. So I would encourage lessening some regulations to encourage some development or planned unit developments or productive development to happen, mainly because we could really use the financial input in the city. So I feel good about this, especially that it's been run by legal. And Mr. Goins, I know that you're very good at what you do. And so what we'll do is at this point, that ends my statement on the subject. So at this point, it appears that what we want to do is, if my fellow commissioners concur with this, what we're going to do is have a first reading on these three and not scheduling a second reading. Does that seem to be what we've come with that?
I can return with these items under old business once
Okay.
we're ready to
All right.
address all these different
All right,
comments.
so at this point, we're just going to have a first reading on all three. Okay, so now let me get my ducks in order here on how we do this, because we have to go out of something. So I will restate that at this time, we, as three commissioners, have agreed to concur for first reading on these three consecutive ordinances, and that at this point, we are closing this public hearing. Leslie Ann, could we please have a first reading of these three ordinances?
Ordinance number 1848-0614, first reading. An ordinance of the City of Shelton, Washington, amending chapters 2.36 and 20.32 of the Shelton Municipal Code, and ordinances number 1750-0709 and 1713-1207 relating to powers of the hearings examiner and planned unit development. Ordinance number 1850-0614, first reading. An ordinance of the City of Shelton, Washington, amending Chapter 20.66 of the Shelton Municipal Code, and ordinance number 1483-1197 relating to wireless communications facilities. Ordinance number 1851-0614, first reading. An ordinance of the City of Shelton, Washington, amending Chapter 20.49 of the Shelton Municipal Code, and ordinance number 1311-191 relating to site plan review procedures.
Thank you. Next is, we're coming to our consent agenda, and I believe my fellow commissioners have had ample time to review the information in the consent agenda, and so could we please have a reading of that consent agenda?
Consent agenda, vouchers numbered 83463 through 83536 in the amount of $225,209.74. Commission meeting minutes from business meeting of May 19th, 2014, and study session of May 27th, 2014. Northcliffe Road, Canyon Creek Culvert Replacement. Award the project to Cayman Excavation by signing the award form and authorize the mayor to sign the contract when returned from contractor. Target Zero and Personal Services Contract. Authorize the mayor to sign amendment number 1 for the Target Zero Interagency Agreement and the Mason County Target Zero Manager Duties Agreement for the period of July 1, 2014 to June 30th, 2015. Placement of 8 signs designating 2 local historic districts. Approve the signs in the 2 city-approved historic districts and installation by Public Works.
Did we get the minutes in there? Did you read the minutes? Okay. I missed it, sorry. All right. Do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda as read?
I move we approve the consent agenda.
I second that.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The consent agenda passes. We have a new old business at this time, but we have some items under new business. And the first item is item number H, and that is going to be a briefing about our Nisqually Jail Service Agreement and it'll be given to us by Shelley Conklin. Shelby Conklin, that's right.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners.
I'm not going to put a 3-minute timer on you. You got
Okay.
all night.
It probably won't take 3 minutes. I'm here this evening bringing an agreement for jail services between Nisqually and the City of Shelton for your consideration. Currently, the city has 2 other agreements for jail services, Mason County and Forks. As you're aware, getting space in the Mason County Jail has been difficult for some time. So the city has supplemental contracts with other jurisdictions, or has had, with other jurisdictions, Yakima, Wapato, with Forks being the most recent. This proposed agreement is necessary due to a reduction in the Mason County Jail staffing and a further reduction in the maximum number of inmates the jail can accommodate, and also renovations at the Forks Jail facility requiring temporary closure of one of their inmate units, also resulting in a reduction of inmate population. Provided in the briefing is the cost comparison for housing inmates in the different facilities. Mason County is $81.06 per day, Nisqually $65, plus a one-time booking fee of $20, and Forks at $45 a day. The agreement with Nisqually is a 5-year agreement with an annual escalation clause of up to a maximum amount of $75 per day. There's no minimum required by this agreement, no need to reserve bed space, so it's on an as-needed or as-used basis. Forks is anticipating that their reduction in inmates will be temporary and hopefully back at their previous level by August. Given the availability and close proximity, Nisqually appears to be a viable option to support the city's need for inmate housing in the interim and into the future as need arises. If you have questions about this proposed agreement, I'd be happy to respond at this point.
Questions or comments?
I'm just curious, how come Mason County so much higher?
Well, the contract requires that they take the full cost of running the jail, every expense that goes into the jail, and divide that by the average number of inmates they house, and that's how they determine the cost. Beyond that, I don't know.
On transportation costs, how does that fit into that? Because it would cost us a little bit more to drive to Nisqually.
Well, actually,
Forks, so.
what we have been doing with Forks is having people report here, and then Forks comes and picks them up. What we're anticipating doing is having them turn themselves in at Nisqually, so that rather than coming here or being held in the Mason County Jail, because we actually can't get people held in the Mason County Jail. We'll just have them, when they're sentenced, go over there. If they don't go over there, then of course warrants for their arrest would issue and that. But we're finding that the majority of people do actually report when ordered to.
Questions or comments anymore?
Sounds good to me.
I thought that was interesting when I read that you just told them to go to jail and they...
Well, they understand that there's a consequence to not reporting, so, yeah. Sometimes they don't, but most often they do.
All right, so it appears that we concur on this issue and that we'll follow your recommendations by placing the Nisqually Jail Service Agreement on the consent agenda for June 9th, 2014. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is going to be something that, it's a briefing submitted to us by our acting police chief, Les Watson, and it's going to be concerning an agreement we have with WestNet. And you have 1 minute. Just kidding.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. I believe it was last June you authorized the mayor and the city administrator to sign an agreement, a continuing agreement we've had for a number of years with WestNet to provide a detective to that organization. This is related to that. agreement in that the state requires each year that WestNet, which is the grant receiver, and any sub-recipients, that would be the City of Shelton, provide verification that they're in compliance with certain things such as a drug-free workplace, Civil Rights Act of 1964, equal employment opportunity requirements and things of that nature. So what we're asking is that you move this item onto the consent agenda for June 9th and authorize the mayor and city administrator to sign this compliance form indicating that we maintain compliance with those federal requirements.
Questions or comments?
Straightforward.
Yes, sir.
Okay, it appears we concur and agree to this, and so you want to place this on our consent agenda for June 9th, 2014, and it shall be done unless Administrator Dave O'Leary has something else to add to that. Okay. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Watson.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate that. Okay, very good. Next is, we're turning this over to our city administrator, Mr. Dave O'Leary.
I have a couple of things. First one will be Mike Michael. He's reporting on a contract issue that just arose on a contract we've already approved. If there's a little change to it, I want to keep you in the loop.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Yeah, this has to do with the Department of Health, Department of Commerce, Public Works Board funding application, or funding agreement that we just had the mayor sign about a week ago. Through some discussions last week, there was a realization that a standard provision that we basically agreed to got left out of the contract. So this morning I received revised contracts, and that standard provision just basically says we agree to have ownership or control of all of the property we need prior to awarding our construction contracts. So got new copies of the contract this morning with that provision added in, and we're going to have the mayor re-sign the contracts and send them back.
So you can't just build tanks anywhere you want.
That's, yeah, it's kind of tough to do, kind of risky sometimes.
And there was 2 items. Did you say 2 items? Or that was the only one?
That was the only one I had.
You have another item. Okay. Thank you.
The second one, just I want to report in on our internship recruitment. One of the challenges that we've had with that position is that our city required a half-time employment for the first 3 months and then full-time employment for the second 3 months as a addition to any of those positions. Recognizing that, one of the things that I did was go look for another organization that could offer a half-time internship for the first 3 months, so we would effectively get someone full-time employment. And during that time, we gave it 2 organizations. And on Friday, I learned that KWC had committed to hiring that person as an intern in their organization. So actually, I think we've enhanced our ability to recruit to the position that we made to offer someone 6 months of full-time employment.
Very good.
That's the report for this week.
So Dave, is it being advertised like that as a full-time for 6 months?
It's being advertised, well, it makes it a little more complex than being advertised because now there's 2 organizations that will effectively be supervising the person. But I think that, and so you had to change the announcement a bit, but actually I think that enhances the job because an intern is looking for prior employers to put on a resume, and now they'll have 2. They'll have experience in 2 different kinds of organizations, both of them related to cities. I also understand that the work that AWC is planning thus far, and they're getting ready for the conference right now, so they're a little bit pressed for time to put details into things. But the idea is to put it in the research department, working on city infrastructure issues. So the 2 disciplines will be very complementary, what we're asking them to do and what AWC will ask them to do.
All right. Thank you very much. If anyone else, yes, Mr. Clark.
One more thing, if I may report on, the commissioners asked about the ability for senior and low income to possibly have discounted rates associated with the water rate increase we just talked about earlier. And we are pursuing that. In fact, Kathleen and I had a good conversation today. The MRSC has some information already about what other jurisdictions have done. It certainly is a legal thing that we can do. And so it'll be an independent process. We'll come back and report on how we can maybe do that within our codes. So stay tuned for that. But it'll be independent of the rate increase we talked about earlier.
Very good. And that was something we were going to put under administration final touches.
Oh.
Yeah, that's 2 points from now. But you've already done it, so I follow my program. One program's right here. Okay, the general public comment, anybody? Okay, seeing none. Do we have any, administration final touches, that was that one.
No.
We got that one. Any other touches? All right. See how diligent I am? All right, our next meeting will be Monday, June 9th at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. This meeting's adjourned.